Yeah, I felt really emotional telling those stories again. I mean, I didn't expect to feel that at all. I felt quite choked up, actually. And I mean, because it's so long ago, isn't it? And I wouldn't have thought I would have felt like that so long afterwards. But somehow telling them, it brings it back very, very vividly. And I can remember how I felt then, and I feel kind of really quite emotional about how difficult it was for me then, and I feel quite I feel transported back there a bit, really.
Our story starts in a coastal town or city or village, somewhere in the southeast, in a silent room, a room with a box in it, a box with a lid, full of the flotsam and jetsam of a life, a voice box, shut up, sealed and silent. I am a Scarlet Tiger, pleased to meet you. That's where I was born, in that sealed box, in that silent room. It was a queer sort of silence in that box. A silence full of the unspoken. What we'd been told was unspeakable, illegal, forbidden. A queer silence, packed with stories, waiting to break out.
You know, well, the first half of my life, like many people,
I wasn't entirely happy with the role in the world that I'd been given.
I didn't fit in. I sort of smelled wrong, you know.
You know, they can feel it at 1,000 paces when you're not right.
So this was my life, you know, this...
Feeling entirely wrong and being in the wrong role.
Being in the role I was in, and I didn't know what my role could be.
And this was the 60s. It's a long time ago.
Where do I begin? It's a feeling that I had back in the 70s of realising that I was a lesbian. Probably wouldn't have used that word then, but not knowing any starting point. How do you find people? How do you connect with people? Who do you tell?
I mean, it was never talked about. Things weren't, were they? The word gay hadn't been invented.
There were a lot of us in that box, all slowly hatching out of our eggs, without the words to understand what or who we were. So we settled for words that others used, seeing as we hadn't the words to describe ourselves.
I just drifted along and along for years. I tried the gay thing when I was younger, but it was a taboo subject and I didn't know any gay people, so I then fell into the trap of finding a wife and going down that route.
It took me a long time to identify as a lesbian, and longer still to have the courage to act on it.
Not quite fitting in, we sat quietly in our box. We could hear what they called us, those outside. Words harsher than sticks or stones, which terrorize, threaten, shame. We knew all about that.
In my knowledge, gay meant AIDS. And from what I understood, if you were gay, you would get AIDS. So I just talked myself out of it.
But I think what I was imagining was a kind of nasty woman, really. Sad, maybe predatory, ugly, unloved. I don't know where I got that idea from.
What happens to a gay man? You've got 21 years of life leading up to that as well, haven't you? The first 18 years of my life was spent in Worthing, which, you know, Worthing was Worthing. It was a fairly dull, sleepy, average seaside town. It's funny thinking about it. I was sort of forced out of the closet before I realised, before I was really ready to.
I suspected there was more to life than this old box, full of someone else's worn-out shoes and clothes. I longed for open space, for light, even though I didn't know what that was.
I think it wasn't until I sort of started growing up that I was thinking, you know, why do I feel like this? the questioning began in my head. Why do I feel like this? Why do I question whether I'm a full boy? But I'm not doing anything. But what I do is I create a place where I can mentally go and become a girl.
I can see myself as a girl. It's almost mentally played out. I create a room, I can walk down the stairs to this room, and in this room I can be this girl. I'm not this boy. And I would do that every now and then. I let myself go there and think about it. I once put it like it's like a little stone in your shoe, but it's always been there. And you're kind of used to it.
So amazingly powerful, these masks we wear, the masks of gender, the masks of anything. You take it off and it...
You can't take it off too quickly because it'll bleed, because it's too attached to you. But I did. There was no choice. So it was really difficult.
But going back to what happened. So nothing happened other than I actually opened the box and decided to open the box. And why did I open the box? Possibly because I call it the force that's in. That when you're trans, it's like a force. It is a force. And it doesn't matter what you do to hide it, it's going to come out. And my time was then. It came out at that point. I opened the box.
I open the box. We open the box. It's opened for us. And the voice box opens. Listen.
The tip of the tongue, the teeth and the lips, the tip of the tongue, the teeth and the lips.
The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain.
4, out.
Initially, having been married for just over 20 years, now come to live in the south, life was opened up to show a different sort of life was possible to the commitment I tried to make to marriage, despite the fact I was interested in other men more than anything. So I decided that I needed to get out of it, and I met somebody I was interested in. As much as they tried to persuade me not to end my marriage, I decided to press forward. I wanted freedom. Freedom, I suppose, was one of the biggest things I was looking for, but it takes a lot of strength to get to that place. And it's very, very painful, the actual breakup of a 30-year marriage when you're actually starting to pack it into boxes.
At that time, this is my coming out, first lesbian love story, because I'm packing up home, moving house, so you come across lots of things, from your past. And I had a friend with me yesterday afternoon, and I kept saying, "Oh, look at this! Oh, look at that! Look this!" And showing her inscriptions from the books that were given to me. And there was one such book from my first woman lover, who I won't name. It was just so wonderful to see those words written to me, all the way back then. Kind of because it was a different era. And I think also going into sexual intimacy with somebody has a particular terror for me to do with my past. So I kind of had mixed feelings about her, but it was such a beautiful unfolding, and I felt launched into the world. I could go on to tell you about going out to Michigan Women's Music Festival, for example. I'd heard about these festivals, and I really wanted to go because I knew that Women's Music Festival meant Lesbian Music Festival. And there was going to be about 8,000 of them. So that was brilliant. And I could tell you about dancing naked under the stars at night. The freedom, the particular freedom that afforded me in a world where I had learned to be very frightened as a woman, a young female, very early on in my life, not to trust anyone. And so the passage of entering, you know, fully embracing my woman-loving and lesbian self, whatever, is that it was a passage to kind of, well, helping me to become empowered around my sexuality, but also as a female, as a woman.
I suppose I was lucky in the sense that I came out in the beginning of the 70s in London. There was a flourishing gay scene of pubs and clubs where one could meet friends or pick up partners for sex quite easily. It was an exciting thing to look forward to as you took off your office suit and put on jeans and check shirt and a bomber jacket.
Some weeks later, the appointment came for the mental health unit. I went to the appointment. Then I got a letter copied to the gender identity clinic. Following that, I got a letter from the gender identity clinic asking me for my first appointment, 22nd of September 2011. Obviously, the issue then was, how do I broach this with my wife? I remember sitting there for about a week before I actually did it. Every evening, I was trying to tell her. I would bottle out. It was on a Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday. I felt an absolute failure. But the next week, we're sitting there watching something on Sky, and I said to her, "Do you know what gender dysphoria is?" There was silence for about a minute, and then she paused the Sky, turned to me and said, "Of course I know what gender dysphoria is. Are you telling me you've got gender dysphoria?" I said yes. She turned, clicked the Sky back on. Programme played. Eventually she paused it again. After about 5 minutes, she looked at me and said, "So what have you done about this?" I told her I'd been to the GP. The GP had referred me to the local mental health unit. I've had the appointment, and they'd referred me to the gender identity clinic, and I've got the appointment for such and such a day. She turned and looked at me. "Oh, you've done all this by yourself?" Turned away. Watched some more TV.
So, well, anyway, Christine and I had been together for a few months. That can be Christine. And my daughter was at sea. So I said to Christine, "I've got to tell Maggie when she comes home. If we're going to be together, I need to tell her." So Christine said, "No, you don't have to tell her." I said, "Yes, I do. I do have to tell her." So anyway, I'm not a great drinker. I don't drink a lot. And so anyway, I got a bottle of wine, and my daughter had gone off out. She was home on leave, and I was sitting in the kitchen on my stool here with my bottle of wine, and I think I must have drunk about half of it when she come in the back door. And so she looked at the bottle of wine and me smoking away at my fags and everything, and I said, "I've got to tell you something." So she said, "Well, what is it?" So of course I had a little cry, obviously, and because the chances was she would have turned against me completely. And what chance did I take? Did I want to stay with Christine, or did I want to lose my daughter? So I thought, well, she's on her way in life, and now this is my time of life. So anyway, I said, "I've got to tell you something." So I told her about Christine and me, and poured myself another drink, and she put her arm around me and she said, "Thank God for that, Mum, because I thought you was going to tell me you was an alcoholic." So anyway, you know, I was so chuffed because, you know, there was me bringing up my daughter, who was well on their way in her career to be at sea, but the chances was if I hadn't brought her up to accept everybody, would she have turned against me?
My first boy-boy kiss, if you want to call it that, when I was probably about 25, and that was actually quite a revelation. I wasn't expecting it. I'll just put it in. I was at a social event and someone had pulled me to the side and basically kissed me, which I was not expecting whatsoever. And the best way I can describe it, it is my knees buckled underneath me and I went, so this is what a kiss is supposed to feel like.
Out of that box, in the corner of that room, I flew. Out of the box I'd been born in, dreaming of a light I'd never seen. I thought I'd be a butterfly, emerging splendid. Instead, here I was, a plain and ordinary moth, flying around, hungry for the stories of how others had found the light.
I should really be sitting here talking about my alter ego, Mabel, the drag queen, in a wig, but no, I'm actually here, sitting here in my man clothes. Mabel started out quite a few years ago. She was working in a bar as a man, and it was a quiet shift. And she suggested to the manager that we need to start doing something a bit more active, enticing people in. So we threw our first ever camp bingo. We didn't know how it was going to go. The pub wasn't really used to that sort of thing, and oh my God, it was brilliant. It was the first time I'd ever done anything like that.
I didn't actually do it in drag. I'd done it in a pair of stilettos, painted toenails, a pair of skinny jeans, and a sparkly top. It went down so well. We progressed it, and Mabel started to be born. Started to find sparkly little outfits off the peg in M&S or somewhere. In them days, it was called shoes, no stilettos or anything. A few little brooches to sparkle up. First outfit I've had was a red little sequin dress off of eBay. She put 2 feather dusters down the back to give it a bit of glamour. That was a bloody mess, but there we go. It's come to now, sort of like a few years later, that she has taken over my home, you know. And we used to have a very spacious loft. We've now got 3, say, 7-8 foot rails full of dresses.
And I remember lying in sunshine in Toronto looking at this monumental as he had such a powerful man, a beautiful man, thinking, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. See, he kind of let me use his skates and I was all over the place. And then I came back to England and I saved up really hard and I bought a pair of skates for myself. It was £500.
I had them imported specially and they were amazing. And I couldn't skate. And I would go down to the marina at night where there's this big empty car park and skate in the dark through the winter. And I fell and I fell and I fell and eventually I learned to skate and I struggled because I really wanted to. I think for me it was about when you're young and queer, sport is closed off from you and skating allowed me to be very strong and as camp as I wanted to be. I'd be exquisitely elegant.
And then a friend at work suggested I have a tarot done. So I went along, just to see what it was like, not expecting very much. And it was amazing. It really changed my life. The cards came up. I can't remember them exactly, but I think there was a woman with a sword cutting off the head of someone. And apparently that was what I was going to cut off. That was a sign that I would cut off the heads of my life before me and go on to something else. I think there was one that said I've been living a lie up to then. And another was, I think it was a magus or something.
I think it was a magus or something. I don't know. It was a driving force, and I'd have a driving force and energy to go forward and change my life. And so it gave me the courage to start to come out to people.
Yeah, so I found a sense of belonging. And these were the old days when the gay bar was a gay bar. I mean, boarded out windows because they were fed up of bricks coming through them or rockets coming through them at fireworks time or just being generally vandalized. But there was a sense of belonging. Yeah, everyone had everyone else's back.
Did you know we moths have the best hearing in the world? Honest, we do. Look it up. We were born to listen. And as I listened, I began to figure it out. To be seen, you've got to be heard. So I realized I had to get myself out of that box, out of this.
I came out when I was well into my 40s, and it was as late as that for several reasons. One was that I'd been working in the city, which, when I joined the first law firm I worked for, was a very homophobic place, and there was no way that you would ever be an openly gay man. And the other was also that I was a practicing Catholic, which had a very strong influence. So both of those were restricting. And in the nature of things, your emotional side develops. And while I was still in the closet, I had a love affair for about 3 years with somebody who died at the end of those 3 years from AIDS.
And I wouldn't wish on anybody the experience of that and being in the closet. It was totally isolating, a traumatic experience. But when I then became involved, some years later, because it took a few years to recover from that with somebody, I did come out, and what I realised on coming out was the extent to which I had been the main obstacle, that none of my friends cared. Most of my friends realised that wasn't the problem. It was the fear that had dominated my life, my own acceptance of myself.
Family reactions were kind of, a bit weird, I suppose, in some senses. My parents' first reaction was to send me to a psychiatrist and have me cured, which didn't work. Because my psychiatrist, his advice to me was go and find a club. Go and find a club, find like-minded people, and, sort of find yourself a circle of friends, which I thought was quite good.
Okay, well, I've lived in Hastings for 60 or more years, more actually. For a while we used to go down to the Chatsworth, the lower ground floor of the Chatsworth, where there were a lot of old ladies, and it was funny because if we did dance with each other, an old lady would come up and drag you onto the dance floor and say, "Oh, poor boys, they've got nobody to dance with." And we did meet a lot of people like that. Gradually, that was how we began to recognise other people in the gay community in Hastings.
But then there was a succession of nightclubs that didn't last for very long, but they always had funny things attached to them, like ruffles. So you'd have to go home with a basket of fruit or something, which wasn't really funny. It wasn't really very exciting. And you had to go in through the back door. When it was closing time, they had a big bag of stiletto-heeled shoes of all sizes, from 6 to 11, I think. And they took them out on the floor, and it was run by a man called Cha-Cha Heels.
Run by a man called Cha-Cha Heels. I don't remember his real name now. And all the clients were dancing round in 3-inch stiletto heels, much to the detriment of our ankles. There were a couple of other clubs which opened and closed. There was one called Satins, which lasted for about 3 months. We thought it ought to be called Winciettes rather than Satins.
back then we knew enough people that the social scene
didn't really revolve around one particular place. So
in the end, it became sort of a
community where we all sort of
knew what was going on, rather than a trip out to a dreary
cold church hall, and that's it. That's the history of
gay nightlife in Hastings.
I went out to Gaze the Word discussion group in North London, and that was a group of women sitting around the floor amongst the bookshelves, and women of all ages.
Women of all ages.
All of us were quite
All of us were quite nervous. But once we got talking about things that mattered to us, like coming out of family, things that were important to us, we got a lot of things in common, and it was really inspiring.
And then after that,
we
went on to a nearby pub or club. I can't remember which it was, and it was just amazing seeing all the women there so exuberantly dancing, either on their own or else clinging to each other.
And it was just, something quite special.
I felt energised,
excited, free, but also relaxed and at home.
Celestial orientation, that's what they call it. A fascination with moonlight. It's how we find our way. It's nature's call. Sometimes you find the story that you're in isn't where you want to be. So I left home one night, as all moths do. I danced out of the window, flying towards other rooms. It's a life's work to find your own story, to find the right room to fly into.
I've got to tell my life story. And I've been silenced all my life about this particular aspect of my life, and now I have an incredible opportunity to, to be visible, to have my voice heard. And so, being the sort of courageous Amazon that I am, I've took the bull by the horns. And it did help that this really helped actually, that I was, at that time, I'd been working with a theatre company called Resistors. And they formed from women's self-defence classes. They came out of the stories that women were telling who turned up at women's self-defence classes. Now, I didn't go to those self-defence classes, but I joined the theatre company. We were coming up to the end of a rehearsal period in the morning, and I was just bursting with this thing I needed to say to them. And, I just thought, but when I say it, where will that leave me? So anyway, I came out and I said, I can't remember what I said now. Something like, there's something I need to share with the group. I'm an incest survivor. I decided I need to refer to it, but not to go into detail about it. And so that it could be acknowledged that that basically life isn't all ha-ha he-he, as some famous actress said. We're celebrating our stories, so it's about, I suppose, this is my story. I suppose when I was younger, I was a survivor, I was a triumph over tragedy, but now I'm older. I'm ambivalent about claiming the idea of being an Amazon or being a survivor, because what I know is life, it's an ongoing process, it's a work in progress. Recovery from that childhood feels a bit like my life's work at the moment, which is to not stop talking about it and I don't want it to become the only thing about me and to define me, but how can I not talk about this when it has defined me to such a large extent?
Oh yeah, I went to the GP. I got onto a support site. I made a few inquiries, introduced myself, and had a few responses. I was a bit worried. Somebody said I should approach my GP, and I asked them how I should do that. They said the best way is to write something down, type it up, and print it out. Expressing your feelings and where you want to go with this. I remember getting an appointment for 20 to 6. I walked in there Didn't walk out of there for 50 minutes. The whole thing became quite interesting. I was asked by the GP to sit down, and I said, actually, I want you to read this before I sit down. He started reading my letter and mumbling things. He was quite concerned about the content of the letter. He kept saying things like,
had you done this in the 1930s, you'd have ended up in a concentration camp. If you'd have done this in the 1950s or the 60s, you'd have got electroconvulsive therapy. But really, why do you want to do this? He said, really, putting on makeup, beforehand, having to go to work means you have to get up from bed half an hour earlier.
Like a fucking real life movie, my life. I don't know. That was my first criminal conviction. I know maybe that's not relevant, but for putting an ice cream in a girl's face. Growing up, it's like not fitting in. Never did fit in. So it's like, so I deviated a bit, like made people notice me. In some respects, did things, that other people weren't doing. And, it's like kissing women in a pub. Well, life weren't going too good for me, and I just found it was easier. Life was much easier, I was taking drugs. Heroin, yeah, that was just to mask, just to stop the pain. Pain in my, my head, my heart. All the hurt, that I was enduring, or that I had endured, and because I didn't fit in with people, and it's like, it was a safety valve. It was escapism.
In the 80s, I never would have dreamed of coming out in the workplace. I was highly closeted. I dressed like everybody else, behaved like everybody else, and just got on with life, really. It was kind of your dirty little secret, just kept in your own little tribe. And, you always found one or two gay people in the workplace that you could talk to. No, there were times when if it came out, I thought I'd lose my job, only because men would think I was a man-hater. They would see me as not one of the team. I would lose my job or not get the promotion, which was the worst piece as well. Blending in was very important to me.
Blending in is the first lesson in survival. Keep your wings shut, mute your colours, go for browns and beiges, sit still, unobserved. Don't be seen or heard. I listened to stories of celebrations, commiserations, secretive plans and stolen kisses, betrayal, denial, mockery. I learned from the stories of others, from the stories of how they fumbled in the dark, but managed somehow always to find their way back again into the light, stronger and in comfortable shoes.
Some of my fellow student nurses went to a large Pentecostal church in London and invited me there. I went with them and very much felt that there was a place where I could belong and where people would love me and where I could gain some comfort in my grief. It soon became very apparent, however, that it was absolutely not okay for me to be gay, and there were sessions of counselling and prayer for healing and deliverance in order to make me straight. So to prove that I was now straight,
I married the first young Christian man that wanted to marry me.
I was born in 1942, midway through World War II. How that's relevant to anything, I don't know, but it does put me in a context. It was very strange because it never occurred to me that what I was doing, I was reminded at times by cases in the newspaper and things that were going on, Mr. Vassal and Lord Montague and scandals that happened, that what I was doing was illegal. But because it seemed natural to me and because of this alcohol-fueled defiance, I don't think that ever changed anything for me. Being in a college, I couldn't take people back if I met them in pubs or whatever. And a lot of my late evenings were spent necking on public seats in gardens and colleges and outside colleges. And I soon learned that the police would come and patrol and shine a flashlight. And if they saw two blokes, then you were for it and you'd be roped in. So I used to wear a headscarf over my very boofed hair. I was a mod, and nothing ever happened. They would come and shine a torch, assume it was a bloke and a girl, and that was okay. They just passed on wishing you luck and good evening. So that was all very strange.
But children have been a very important part of my life. Sadly, I didn't have children of my own. I was told that because I am a lesbian, I shouldn't have children. Because children should have two parents, a mummy and a daddy. And I did believe I wouldn't make a good parent because my kid wouldn't have a daddy living with them. And I was afraid they would be bullied for having lesbian mums.
And unlike the lesbian and gay part of the community, which has had like almost a 20 or 30 year head start on the trans community, trans stuff came initially from clubs, and rather seedy ones at that. And they would be pick-up joints. But basically, we're sort of rather sexually repressed men who basically fancied having sex with people they saw as men in dresses would be picked up and go off and maybe have sex in a doorway or in a hotel room. And it was all very hush-hush. It was all very back page of the Exchange and Mart and in these really, sex shop adverts. We didn't have the internet. This is like a whole totally distant time. Now, a lot of young people going through this now could never dream of. A lot of sources of access that they would have. So we were basically fumbling around in the dark, as it were, to find people, even in 2003.
I rented a flat in Stoke Newington. And Stoke Newington, several years later, I found out was virtually the lesbian capital of the Western world. I say it jokingly, but there were a heck of a lot of lesbians there. So me and the woman I was with, she wasn't living with me. She lived on the other side of London. We saw a meeting advertised for lesbians in northwest London. And I remember that I dressed in a white skirt that was scattered with a pattern of strawberries and a white T-shirt to match, also with these strawberries, pink strawberries, all over the white. I wore it with pink high-heeled mules, shocking pink. And I must admit, I thought I looked wonderful. I thought I looked tremendous. I had a little white bag and I thought, golly, if lesbians see me, they're going to think, wow, she's smashing. Wouldn't we be lucky to go out with her? So I went along with my friend and there was a room full of women all sitting round, nobody dressed in any way like me. And I went in and someone immediately said,
"Where does she think she is? Ascot?"
And that really did set me back. It made me feel, where was I? I wasn't part of the straight world. I turned my back on that. I was obviously not a lesbian as lesbians wanted. Well, I wanted to say I was. So I think I had probably from about 35 to nearly 40 when I was struggling, really struggling to find a way forward. I was very lonely, but I worked my way through it. I grew up. I'm saying, I can feel myself getting a bit tearful. I feel sorry for that person who took so long, had no real idea how to go forward. I went clumsily forward. But I did go forward. I stopped wearing high heels. That was necessary because they were killing me as I was getting older. It's taken a long time. Only over the last 10 years, in my late 50s, I feel comfortable and proud, really proud.
From my own experience, I know how important it is to find other LGBT people and support each other. Since retirement, I've joined a local LGBT charity, Rainbow Alliance, and taking part in raising awareness partnership meetings with the council, health and other voluntary groups. Without this awareness, several elderly vulnerable people I know are forced back into the closet, hiding all signs of their gay life when a carer comes round.
We both moved in the same day, and from then on we were friends. And as I say, she definitely didn't know I was gay. But she was anti-gay. Gay boys. She wasn't too bad about because she used to work at a charity shop. Mind. And a couple of them were there. And she got really attached to them, but anything else she used to have a go about it. Since I've been here, because really this is quite a straight place, and the majority of people here are. But before, when I lived in London, I was just outwardly gay, and that was it. But this is years ago. I've gone backwards to what the gay scene's gone. Because I kept quiet. Whereas years ago, I didn't. So as I said, basically, I did it the opposite way around. When all the people are coming out now, I went in. I sat and listened, thinking what it would mean to have to go back into the box. I thought about the past and those that had gone before, sketching out flight paths, pointing out the dangers of the flame, the risk of the singed heart and the broken wing. I heard their voices, signals across time, the sound of wings flapping, the sound of triumphs, battles lost and won, and I knew what I had to do.
I think initially you think you're the brave new world, aren't you? Young queers, and it's the 90s, and off we go, and we're radical, and we're doing this, and we're fighting AIDS, yeah. And you think actually those battles have been fought by feminists, emancipationists in the 20s, and the Chartists in the 1890s, and the more you look in those groups of people, the radical feminists, the radical movements, the socialists or regicides, how far back to the English Civil War, there are queer voices, clearly queer voices in those narratives that were not talked about. I certainly wasn't talked about because the government at the time banned that kind of stuff. And you know, if you look close enough, people leave signals, if you will, to the past.
So the starting point was through politics, I think. It was in 76, there was a lot of anti-racist stuff flourishing, or racism flourishing in the UK. So I joined some political groups and got to know people that were political on the left, and therefore kind of supportive of gay rights.
And I saw that as a kind of entry. But slowly, this sort of ripple started, people started connecting and you met others. And by the early 80s, it was 83, I think. I looked it up this morning. It was the first lesbian and gay pride march, which we went on, I think, with a banner that said, "Crawley Gays, we exist," written on a pillar case. And that, it was a fist, with a fist. The fist was taken from socialist workers, I think. But then also, we then started, in Spare Rib magazine, we started advertising with very much that theme. If you live in Crawley, you're not alone.
And out of the window I flew, one moth, tiny against the great sky. And into bedrooms and sitting rooms I flew, kitchens and bathrooms, communal lounges and broom cupboards, landing on the shoulders of giants who seemed unaware of the stir they had created, changing the world, so I could fly freely in and out of windows and through closet doors.
And when we was on the Gay Pride March I mentioned earlier, once we got to where we was all rallying from, we were given phone numbers for solicitors and barristers, in case we get arrested on the march, or if there's any trouble, we've got someone to contact. First time that's ever happened to me when I've been on any sort of demonstration. It was quite weird. Very weird. But every single woman had a phone number written on her arm.
I think we need to learn from these stories because we can lose our freedom so quickly if we aren't vigilant. I was working as a primary school teacher when Section 28 had just been passed. Section 28 was a pernicious law, and it said, amongst other things, that as teachers we were not allowed to teach about so-called pretended family relationships. Well, that meant being gay or lesbian, and we weren't allowed to promote homosexuality. So we'd taken to the streets to protest against the passing of this law, but it was passed anyway. And a lot of us were scared shitless because it meant we couldn't be out at work ourselves and we couldn't work against homophobic bullying or support gay students without risking losing our jobs. And some teachers, including some that I did know, did lose their jobs, and often it was said that it was for something else, but they did lose their jobs.
Something that I found very mind-blowing when I was younger was going on the first ever lesbian and gay pride march. And just to be surrounded by so many women, all the same, all trying to fight for the cause, trying to sort things out in their own way, by holding a banner, walking down the street, having everyone stare at you. It was the craziest idea I've ever been involved in at that time, but well worth it. Lifelong memories they are. So that you can pass on all that fight to up-and-coming gay women and men in the future generations. If they let you do it.
I march with the living and walk with the dead. I stand alongside those who take to the streets.
I'd like to tell you about a bizarre incident that happened to me. And it just shows what it was like for me as a primary school teacher in the 1990s. One morning I was having coffee in the staff room before school, as usual, quick one before the bell rang. And the senior teacher called me outside to have a word.
So he goes in the newspaper box and he holds up a copy of the pink paper. Oh my God. So there's the pink triangle and all the gay and lesbian out and proud words and all that. I'm thinking, oh my God. I really didn't see that one coming. But Bill goes very authoritarian and he goes, well, you must remove it immediately. It's not suitable for the children to see. Mustn't be used anywhere near the tables of painting. So I'm thinking, oh God. I'm always so careful to take out the pink paper and any other dodgy stuff before I bring them into school. but somehow that one must have just got in the pile by mistake. But the point of the story is that I was afraid because of the newspaper I'd accidentally taken into my classroom. And I knew there was nothing wrong with the messages in that newspaper. I was proud and happy to be lesbian. But I was scared because I could have got into serious trouble because of it.
How do you, or what do you share with someone who's actually just at the very beginning of their own journey? In a different context to me, because the world has changed. There are still risks as a young gay man, as a young queer person there are. And I found myself, which really touched me, sharing the stuff that John had first shared with me. And it wasn't about specific sexual diseases or safety when using a dating app. It was about staying true to your own voice, knowing that there'd be people there who would listen to you, that he would find a group of people who would be his friends. And I thought it was really nice to think that actually there's a part of John who's been dead for 25 years in me, that John actually was my gay father, if you will, and that I've passed that on to my friend's son.
And that I've passed that on to my friend's son. At least he'll know that he's not on his own, that he's part of a longer generation. Because we often think we're the only ones, you know? And if we're not the only ones, we're the first generation. And with John and David, I saw myself connected through to whole generations of gay men and queer people who had struggled in their own ways, in positive situations and negative, through the wars, through the development, you know, and had found themselves safe spaces, sometimes very secretive, sometimes very out, but had kept their true voices. And it was really lovely to think that actually I was that lad sitting on that mountain once.
Life, of course, changed when I met other moths like me. Blotched Emerald became my friend. Buff Tip broke my heart, and Dingy Mocha stood me up. I thought I'd stay with Orange Swift forever. Kentish Glory always keeps in touch. Oh yes, I've had my fair share of breakups and heartaches, but good times too. Nights out with leopard moth and silverwing, in search of nocturnal creatures just like me.
We met about 17 years ago.
No, probably more than that, darling.
It must be.
20 odd years.
I think it was in 97.
96.
96 or 97 that we first met. And we met with a walking group of women, lesbians. They were all lesbians, weren't they?
Yes. We went for a very special walk, didn't we? We went by ourselves, and I remember we sat on the top of the hill.
By Lewis.
By Lewis, yes. On top of Lewis, which is absolutely beautiful. And I can't remember the time of the year, can you?
No, I can't, no.
What then what happened, darling?
What really happened was that we started walking the wrong way to go away from Lewis. We had to turn round again and go back. And we went down to Lewis, and you said, come back to the flat and have a coffee or something.
Yes, or something, some tea.
So we went in there. I took my boots off, left them outside her door, pottered round in my socks. And it just was a short time. And then I got in the car and came back home. And what happened next?
Well, I thought, oh, she's left her boots behind. So I don't know whether it was you rang me up or I rang you, but you said, I'll come and collect them. But before the one thing I remember, I don't think Joni remembers, I said on the phone, I said, you've left your boots here. And she said, you do keep a girl hanging on, don't you? And what happened then?
Well, then I came to collect my boots, and I stayed a lot longer than a few minutes, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, yes.
And that was really the start of our relationship.
I got on the chat room, which was for trans people, and that's how I met my now wife. Our wedding, it was better than the royal wedding. No, it wasn't. It was a very small wedding. We only invited 8 people. We didn't want a great big wedding sort of thing. We just wanted a low-key wedding, and it was really nice. It was a sunny day. We had the reception up at Patcham, my wife's ex's house, because we all get on. It's very good.
Do you know what a group of us are called? A group of moths? An eclipse is what we're called. An eclipse of moths. When we're together, we fly so close we can hide the moon, changing the view with each flap of our wings. And surely you've heard of the moth effect? How a single tiny motion of a flapping of a wing, a slight disturbance can set in motion a whole chain of events that make the perfect storms which change the world.
Have we affected the straight world? I think, in general, I think gay, queer, transgender, I think we've all changed the straight world, because what's happened is we're making them actually think about flowing within yourself, and there's different aspects to yourself. And I think instead of them thinking, oh, they're this, they're that, they're starting to realise that we have all different aspects within ourselves. And so it's more to do with, as I say, to do totally being open to all the different aspects of yourself. So I think, like when I go out, when I meet people that supposedly straight, if you want to give them that word, they're much more interested in talking to you as a mirror and finding out about themselves. And of course, within that, you also find out about yourself.
When finally I had the chance to catch sight of myself reflected in the glass, I realised I was beautiful, a cousin of the butterfly. Just like one story is cousin to another, teaching us the way to fly, to find our way to home. And I am home.
And my home, although a different building in a different place, is the same space. It's a welcoming queer space that I haven't created. I've been lucky enough to create with other queer people around me. Yeah, I think for me it's a state of mind, and I think it's a queer space. It's about not being the other. It's about being part of your own family.
Well, we told us we were going to have a civil partnership. And she said, we'll go outside and wait for the taxi. She said, we're now outside. And across the roads was this pink Rolls Royce with the chauffeur. And she said, that's your wedding present. You're not getting nothing else. So we got in the Rolls Royce. They followed behind, by car and taxi behind. And we went all the way along the seafront in this pink Rolls Royce. Me waving like the Queen to people like this. I was waving out the window to everybody, and I said, we're getting married today.
And through my life experiences, it has built up my confidence. I would never have done something like this 10 years ago. No way. Sitting in a room, talking about my life or rambling on about my life. I would never have done it. So I didn't see family. Don't really need family. I've learned that over the years. It's nice to have them if you need to fall back on them, but I think friends are much more important to me than family.
But I think one of the amazing things, what both Jen and I went through, and we did all the paperwork for it, was the days our GRCs arrived. And we'd amassed all the requisite paper required for it. And to suddenly have, in early 2008, your birth certificate turn up. And because of its thing at the time, they now say male and female on the birth certificate, but then it would have said boy or girl. And then you get this birth certificate and it says, on the 10th of October, 1965, a girl. And just seeing that on a birth certificate and in print, and it realises suddenly that you felt all your life and you go, that's right. a wrong has been righted. Something has been corrected that should never have been put down. And you know, it wasn't your family's fault because they didn't understand. Your mum and dad didn't have, wouldn't have really got it. I think celebrating sometimes, as we've said, it's the most prosaic of things. It's being in Tesco's in Hove with your wife, thinking, this is my wife.
I'm going to tell you about a 60th birthday meal that I went to in Collioure in France.
It was absolutely brilliant.
It was a brilliant restaurant. It was in the ruins of an old convent, and there were about 20 women there. We were mainly older women.
We all arrived. We were asked to bring something with us that represented somebody who was a hero to us.
And one woman took a hairbrush because when she was younger, she wanted to be a backing singer. They were her heroes. And she was practicing in her bedroom singing into this hairbrush, and she brought the same hairbrush, and we got a little bit of a song as well.
And then there was somebody else, and we thought, she hasn't brought anything with her. We suddenly noticed she had a beauty spot. Madonna had been her hero, so she had the beauty spot in homage to Madonna.
When we'd all gone through our things, we went into the restaurant and the waiters were all a bit sort of, a bit sort of patronising. They were a bit amused because all these older women filing in quietly, we all sat. We had a long table at the front of the restaurant.
And we all sat down and we had our meal and everything was very decorous. And then, after the meal, the first thing we did was to sing Move Over Darling, Doris Day song to the birthday girl.
And I thought Doris Day would have been spinning her grave, but my part tells me she's still alive, so sorry, Doris.
We had to wear outrageous sunglasses for some reason while we were doing this, so we were quite loud. We all had the words, so we knew what we were doing.
And the other diners, who were all French as far as we knew, looking at us a bit sideways. So we had some of those little bubble kits on the table, so the birthday girl took them around to the other tables and offered them to them. And they seemed to enjoy that. They opened them and they were blowing bubbles and things and talking to us and smiling across. And then we had the speeches.
There were a couple on the table next to us, very young couple. Maybe it was their first date. He was gazing into her eyes. But he couldn't really. Because she wasn't looking at him, she was looking at us and everything that was going on with our table. With the speeches, there were humorous ones and she was laughing, and there were emotional ones and she was crying and wiping her eyes. He was giving us these filthy looks. By the end of the evening, they were just sitting there with their arms folded, not even looking at each other. I don't know if they ever had another date.
And then the singing started and we sang in English, and the French weren't having that. So they sang in French, we sang in English, they sang in French. And then we all ended up at the end of the evening singing the Marseillaise in French. And we were all stood up and we were all singing it together. We were all cheering at the end and shaking hands and talking to each other. It was brilliant.
And the poor waiters were sort of, when we went, they could see them thinking, oh, please go, please. And they all slumped up against the wall, absolutely worn out. So I doubt whether they'll have anybody over the age of 60 going there again, I wouldn't think.
Oh, it was a brilliant evening. It was so nice to spend it with a group of women. You know, when you're younger, you kind of take things like that for granted, but I do. And then when you're older, you really appreciate it more with a group of people, being with a group of people. But you do remember those people that are no longer with you. You have a tinge of sadness, but you're so pleased to be doing that, to be having an experience like that was absolutely brilliant.
Breath is not only for the speaking of words. Blow up the balloons. Let's celebrate the marriages and the families we've formed, our friendships, the hard-won recognitions, and the homes we've made, the stories we're proud to tell of where we were and how we got to where we are, both butterfly and moth. of the many selves we once were and are, and who, of course, we are still to be.
I think we need to learn from these stories because we can lose our freedom so quickly if we're not vigilant. Just have to look at what's happened to LGBT people in many countries around the world now to know how prejudice, hatred and persecution can be directed at people because of their sexuality. And closer to home, it's very alarming. Some groups of people are trying to stop schools from teaching children about LGBT lives and choices.
I long for days when bigotry and intolerance are eliminated. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But it disturbs me that it seems to be on the increase in our world, and I hate hearing of the fate of other people in countries where they are treated so cruelly and with so little understanding and tolerance. That upsets me more than just about anything else I can think of in this world. The lack of understanding and acceptance of people who are quite naturally what they are, being themselves.
And I hope for a time when diversity is not only recognised, but valued and cherished. And for a time when our children will be nurtured and loved for themselves, and not for what they can achieve, and not for how they can become replicas of their parents, or exploited to serve the interests of a powerful state or elite. And I hope for a time when differences in sexuality are celebrated and not scorned or persecuted. And of course, the time for making these happen for the future is now. And I want to be part of that.
You know, nowadays I have a fantastic life.
I don't give a damn what people think about me.
And life is good. I mean, I'm enjoying it.
I now know who I am.
I just wish I had another 80 years to live so I could enjoy it as I'm feeling now.